Hey guys, and welcome back to another Star Wars video. So today we have some pretty massive Star Wars news, and on the face of it, this does look very dramatic, but I wouldn't call it Star Wars drama in the most conventional sense. I'd rather use the term creative clash between two long-standing writers in the Star Wars franchise. And when it comes to comparing Star Wars Rebels and the Ahsoka show, on the face of things, the way Lucasfilm wants the audience to perceive the two shows, they're supposed to complement each other and go hand in hand. Star Wars Rebels introduces us to the Ghost Crew. By the end of the 4 seasons, Ezra and Thrawn have been launched into hyperspace, and so for all intents and purposes, Ahsoka is a live-action continuation. However, despite the characters being the same and many plot threads continuing, many Rebels fans are adamant that Ahsoka is not a good spiritual successor to the show. Whether it's the characterization of certain heroes, and that's what we're going to talk about today, to the handling of Thrawn, and dissent for Rosario Dawson's stoic portrayal of Ahsoka, plenty of Rebels fans disown the live-action show, and they've said, nope, not for me, this is not the same story. And someone very prominent who's now joined the chorus of, I guess, frustration and confusion is Henry Gilroy, someone who knows Star Wars Rebels better than most. He's a co-writer and co-producer on the show, and he recently said that there is one decision in Dave Filoni's Ahsoka that baffled him, something which he vehemently disagrees with, and he's not the only one. Making Sabine Wren a Jedi, who was also, out of the blue, once a Padawan to Ahsoka Tano, a character she barely spoke to in the animated show. This, of course, is something which came up during the first season, and honestly, while you might argue there is some foreshadowing in Rebels, the animated series goes out of its way to state that Sabine does not have the Force, despite her skills with the Darksaber, and also Ezra's lightsaber. Now you can do the blanket Force handwave thing and just say that everyone has the Force, but in terms of Sabine's arc, I agree with Henry. She should not have been made a Jedi. And like I said, it's not just the fact she was struggling with Force sensitivity, and by the end of the season she's able to use Force push. It's also the crazy reveal that between Rebels and Ahsoka, she was Ahsoka Tano's Padawan. At some point, they became master and apprentice. Then tragedy struck when Sabine lost her family during the Purge of Mandalore, and she and Ahsoka parted ways. And now going into season 2, after Ahsoka's rebirth, now that Sabine is ready, she's going to resume that relationship. And you guys know, I'm far from an Ahsoka hater. The last 2 episodes were not as strong as the first 6, but I'm with Henry Gilroy. The decision doesn't make much sense. So here's what he said. It was absolutely not the plan. As a matter of fact, we had a discussion about it in season 3. We really felt not only did it step on Ezra's story, but it was kind of a retread. It was like, okay, we already did this. So the idea of Sabine training as a Jedi when she's already this fantastic warrior of her own type, we really felt like that was overkill, and Dave Filoni agreed. It was never in the cards, because Sabine is already a Mandalorian warrior. And so then he goes on to directly address Ahsoka, and he says he was not part of any of those conversations. He has nothing to do with the live-action show, but it did take him aback. He says, quote, "We thought it was a bad idea. We did a whole pros and cons list. So this is kind of a weak retread. I've always fought against it." He's talking about making Sabine Force sensitive, tooth and nail. Absolutely not. And then he talks about the most absurd moment from Ahsoka, saying this: "What I loved about the story in Rebels with the Darksaber is you don't have to be a Jedi to embrace Jedi philosophy." And this is when he really throws Ahsoka under the bus and says, the way it was explored in Rebels Season 3 is better than, quote, "I'm gonna Force push Ezra 100 feet when I've never used the Force before." And look, I know Henry Gilroy's picked up on one specific character. He's talking about Sabine, but I do believe this is indicative of a wider issue with the show. It should have handled its Rebels plotlines better than it did. And I'm saying this as a fan of Ahsoka. The best parts of it for me were the villains, but when it comes to following up on the Rebel stuff, some plot threads felt a bit underwhelming, which is crazy because the potential for this story was insane. And arguably one of the bigger letdowns was when we found Ezra. We had been wondering for years, what happened to him? He was launched by the Purgle into the unknown with Grand Admiral Thrawn. Despite being enemies, were they going to form some kind of alliance? Maybe one out of necessity? Was Ezra going to turn to the dark side? Was he going to change? Whatever the case, we expected some growth. But you could argue, And I do take into consideration, we've only seen him for a couple of episodes in live action, that he's more or less the same character he was in Rebels. There was very little development. So many years in exile away from his friends, away from his family, and he didn't seem too impacted. Granted, he had a beard, and he knew martial arts, and now he has a new lightsaber. But we know nothing about his time with Thrawn, something which even Timothy Zahn said he'd love to explore someday in a book. I think Amanis Fundy is a wonderful Ezra. His humour, his love for his friends, it's all still there. But it does seem a bit strange that after a decade away from everything he's known, he's pretty much the same guy. No changes and little development. And you might say, well, he has changed. He's grown. He's calmer, more centered, more Jedi-like. There just wasn't time to explore it in the first season. Well, if that's the case, I'll be patient. But I have another theory. Who is another fan favourite Jedi? A much more famous one who also underwent a kind of exile, who changed, and when he did, fans hated him. Luke. I wonder if due to fan backlash, Lucasfilm was trying to avoid a Jake Skywalker situation. Because the character of Ezra was already beloved in Star Wars Rebels, they didn't want to rock the boat. They didn't want to take the risk, making an Ezra Bridger that no one recognised. But the point still stands. I hope someday, whether it's Dave Filoni or Timothy Zahn, who's not getting as much work as he wants these days, that they explain what happened in those missing years. But I'm hoping, like I say, Season 2 gives us more time with Ezra, now that he's back home, and Lucasfilm eventually shows us what Ahsoka and Sabine's dynamic as master and apprentice was like, and what it's going to be like now that they're stranded on Peridea. But I've been thinking about what Henry said, and there's a very important distinction between Sabine possessing the potential to become a Jedi, and whether or not that was the right choice for the character, because Kanan in Rebels even says that it's got nothing to do with having the Force, but being open to it, because the Force resides in all living things. So I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad choice because she can't have the Force, but because I don't think she needed it. That's where I agree with Henry. Sabine was already a very strong character in her own right, and there are other Force users to focus on during this time. Ezra, Ahsoka, maybe even Jason Syndulla, obviously Luke, although I don't think he's going to appear anytime soon, and then our villains, Shin and Baylan. And there seems to be a tinge of confusion in Henry's voice, more so towards Dave Filoni going back on his word. Dave originally agreed that Sabine shouldn't be a Jedi, but maybe one of the reasons he felt now was the time is to balance out the two villains. So now we have the good guys, Ahsoka and Sabine, and on the other hand, Baylan and Shin, independently of course. And I think even amongst those who expected Ahsoka to be a follow-up to Rebels, there were always going to be some differences. Natasha Liu Bordisso warned us about this in the build-up to the first season. She did explicitly state that her version of Sabine is a bit different compared to the character in Rebels, but I think we just assumed that's just the nature of live-action adaptations. A new actress, a new voice, but we didn't expect Sabine to go down the Jedi route. I'm still so excited for Season 2, between Dathomir, between a new Baylan, Akbar, and Hera. There is so much to look forward to, and I can't wait to cover it. But share your thoughts on all of today's news in the comments down below, my dear friends. Do you agree with Henry, or do you disagree?